As someone that has dealt with hormonal imbalances for the majority of their 20s, I have found through many years of trial and error that the biggest game changer when it came to figuring out what was going on with my cycle, what was going on with my hormones, was learning how to track my cycle. Being able to see firsthand how things like, for instance, diet, different supplements, different herbs, how all of these were impacting my cycle and either if they were helping my cycle or not. But when you're first starting out with cycle tracking, it can be a little bit confusing. How exactly are you supposed to know what to look for in a chart? You've charted your cycle, but like, what does that all mean? That's why in this week's video, we're going to be talking about what I look for in a chart, what are some key indicators of just regular like cycle health that you want to be aware of when charting your cycle. So if you're new here, hi, my name is Mies. I'm a certified cycle and sexual health educator with a focus on charting your cycle when it comes to hormonal imbalances. All right, so let's talk about cycle charting. So if you're new to cycle charting or you're interested in learning more about what kind of information that you can get by learning how to chart your cycle, we're going to start step by step and looking at a full chart and what kind of areas I look for to assess or get information about overall cycle health for that specific cycle. So the first area that I look at is the first phase of our cycle, that being our period. So first off, I look at the length of the period, so how long was the period? Next thing I look for is the amount. Now, ideally, a good length of the period is anywhere between 3 to 7 days. That lets you know that the previous cycle there was a good amount of time in the follicular phase and the luteal phase, which we'll talk more about why that is in a little bit. But ideally, yeah, when it comes to amount of bleeding, roughly 3 to 7 days is ideal, which that also includes spotting. Next thing I look at is pain. Now, I do like and encourage other people to write down how much pain they're experiencing in different levels. Was it a level 3 pain, level 2 pain, level 1 pain? That way you can keep track of if, for instance, what you're doing, either diet, lifestyle, supplements, is helping with menstrual cramps. You wouldn't really know because pain can be subjective after time. I don't know what I had for lunch 2 days ago, let alone how much pain I was in my previous period. That was roughly over a month ago. So I do encourage people to keep track of how much pain they felt on a level from like 1 to 3 to 4. I leave that up to you. But yeah, keep track of how much pain that you are in, how much discomfort. Remembering that some achiness, some tenderness, some cramping is normal because what the uterus is doing is it is contracting. So the uterine muscles are squeezing to let the endometrial lining shed. That is how we get our period. So there is some discomfort there, some achiness that is normal, but more intense, debilitating pain can be a sign of something else going on. And a better way to keep track of that is by taking note of how much pain you were in that cycle day. Okay, next part that I look at is the follicular phase. So after menstruation, so after our period, we then enter the follicular phase. This is what our body is doing in preparation to ovulate. This is where cycle tracking really comes in because our follicular phase is the part of our cycle that has more variability to it. So a follicular phase can go from anywhere from 6, 7 days all the way to like 20 days. So it is a lot more varied. So this is where cycle tracking really shines. Because if you're not tracking your cycle, you just think that your cycles are just really, really long, or that you might have skipped your period, or that you have a late period and that can give you anxiety. But if you're tracking your cycle, you'll be able to see firsthand that maybe you just haven't ovulated yet. You're not even at the second half of your cycle. For instance, this right here is a chart that I had a couple months ago that was definitely a longer cycle. And if I wasn't tracking my cycle, then I would be at a loss of why my cycle or why my period just hasn't arrived yet. So this cycle here was about 72 days long. It's one of the longer cycles that I've had, which I already know that was contributing to a lot of stress, a lot of dietary things that I had going on, which I knew contributed to that cycle being a lot longer than it normally is. Now, the reason that you'll be able to tell that we are still in our follicular phase is because of our temperatures. So when it comes to tracking our cycle, we keep track of two main areas. We have our basal body temperature, which is our at-rest metabolic temperature, and we have our cervical fluid, which if you don't know what that is, I do have a full video on it, but essentially it is part of our cycle because it happens cyclically, and this fluid is impacted by estrogen. That's why tracking this fluid is able to give us an indication if where we are in our cycle, if we're in a follicular phase versus in our luteal phase. Now, through tracking these two biomarkers, we're able to see when ovulation has occurred. Now, ovulation is key for our overall health. I also did a whole separate video on why ovulation is so important, but it is important for getting us into the luteal phase. Because if we're not ovulating, that means we're not entering the luteal phase. If we're not entering the luteal phase, then we're not creating progesterone. And we want to create progesterone to offset and balance the effects of estrogen. So when we're talking about hormonal imbalance, what we're talking about is the amount of time that we spend in these two phases. Because hormone balancing kind of makes it sound like you want both an equal amount of estrogen to progesterone, but that's not really the case. There is a normal amount of estrogen that is normal for your body, and progesterone comes in at a lot higher of an amount. But when it comes to length, that is the part that we really want to focus on when we're talking about balancing hormones. So we want a decent amount of time spent in the follicular phase, roughly 12 to 16 days, as well as 12 to 16 days in the luteal phase. The only way to get that balance in the length of time is by ovulating, which is why I will continue to say that ovulation is so much more than just for reproduction, it is for our overall health and well being. And the reason that we can end up with longer cycles, so for instance, the cycle that I had that was 72 days long, the reason that that cycle kind of continued for such a long time is because ovulation wasn't occurring. So I knew for that cycle it was stress related. So that is my own body's intelligence saying, like, hey, you're stressed. Let me make sure that you have enough cortisol, enough adrenaline to keep up with this demand of whatever you have going on. So my body thinks it's like a tiger, it's famine, it's war, it's something pretty big. In reality, I'm not really sure what I had going on that cycle. I just know it was just a lot of stress, self-imposed, most likely. So my body doesn't understand that. It just understands that there is a big demand for cortisol. Let me move these resources to make sure that you are creating cortisol and adrenaline to keep up with the demand, which means that my cycle is more of a secondary priority to survival, as it should be, which means that ovulation didn't occur until much later of the cycle. And if you actually look at the chart, you'll notice that the luteal phase was a lot shorter. So the follicular phase was roughly 62 days long, but my luteal phase was only 10 days long, which means I was in my cycles creating estrogen for 62 days, while my body only made progesterone for 10 days. That is a hormonal imbalance right there. But if we look at a more balanced, healthier cycle, so this is the cycle that I had just recently, the follicular phase was roughly 19 days long, and the luteal phase was about 14 to 15 days long as well. So that is what we want to see. That is a good amount in the follicular phase, creating estrogen, and then also in the luteal phase, creating progesterone. And the way that we can see that ovulation has indeed occurred is through tracking our basal body temperature. So you'll notice that in the follicular phase, our basal body temperature is a lot lower. And then once ovulation occurs, because of the demand in metabolism that progesterone requires, it raises up our basal body temperature. So it will shift it up to a whole other range in temperature, which then we're able to determine if we are in our follicular or if we did indeed ovulate and now we're in our luteal phase. Now, when it comes to our luteal phase, we also want to look at the length of it. Ideally, it is more than 9 days, but less than 16 days. That lets us know that there is a good amount of progesterone, especially if the temperatures are more stable. So if they kind of like stay together like it shows in this graph, that lets us know that there is a good amount of progesterone production. That is a healthy amount of progesterone. That's what we want to see. If the temperatures are a little bit more bouncy, more erratic, then that would give us an indication that progesterone is kind of mirroring that. So it's a little bit more erratic. It's not really being produced as well as it could be. So then when we take a step back and look at the full complete cycle, we can see the length of the cycle, how long the cycle was. Was it in a good range? Was it normal for you? Because what's normal for you in your body is going to be different from what's normal for me in my body. So what is normal for you consistently? How much time was spent in the follicular phase? How much time was spent in the luteal phase? And you can mirror that by saying how long was estrogen being produced and how long was progesterone being produced. Once again, ideally, you want an equal, roughly, amount of time spent making those two hormones. And that is kind of like the foundations to balance hormones to healthy hormones. And these two charts that I have that are only 4 cycles apart really show how beneficial it is to chart your cycle. I saw that 72-day cycle and I was like, all right, I need to reel it in. I need to really focus on diet, supplements. I ended up getting a multivitamin, herbs. I really focus on getting better sleep and not letting myself spiral into not taking care of my body or taking care of other people, which is kind of like what I mostly, it's like my pitfall, is taking care of others and neglecting myself. So that is what 4 cycles can look like. I really focus in on my health, overall health, which is how you kind of support your cycle health is by taking care of your overall health. That is how I got from this 72-day cycle to probably one of my more ideal cycles, which is this cycle, which just happened a couple of weeks ago. And I wouldn't have gotten all of that information if I wasn't tracking my cycle in this depth. Now, if that's left you feeling like you want more information on how to learn how to chart your cycle, then I do have a new course that I just released. It is fully self-paced, learn at your own time, that goes into the anatomy and biology of our cycle, as well as everything I felt like was necessary to understand about our bodies, because not a lot of us understand what our body is doing, why, and especially when it comes to just our overall cycle health. A lot of it is kind of like pushed on to like, oh, if you want to have kids, you can care about your health, but not for any other reason. So I kind of pushed everything that I thought was necessary into this course. So you can definitely take a look at that. I'll leave a link down below so you can check that out. So hopefully that was helpful. Let me know down below if you have any questions. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today, and I'll be seeing you next time.